Leon is currently the Executive Director of Parenting and Youth at Focus on the Family, and he has been an expert and a spokesperson on multiple topics dealing with ultimately parenting children and teens. And before we even go into his technical and background information, I want you to know that he has a large family. And I'm going to have him explain that when he's giving the presentation and actually talking. So ultimately, going forward, Leon has a master's degree in communications, and he lives over in Colorado Springs and is joining us from a remote distance. So right now, as we go forward, I'm making the screen available for Leon's screen to show up, and we will now turn the rest of the time for his presentation on what if my child viewed porn. And Leon, it's all yours, and it looks like the screen is started. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Binoy, for very much. Thank you to all our friends at Nanny for allowing us this opportunity to spend some time with you today on a very important topic. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, I've been married for nearly 20 years, and my wife and I are the very proud and blessed parents of 8 daughters. So our daughters range in age from 16 as the oldest all the way down to nearly 3 years old, which is our youngest. And we get a lot of questions about that. Are any of them twins or triplets or anything like that? And no, they all came one at a time. And we are very blessed to have those girls in our lives. But as you can imagine, this is a topic that concerns me greatly as a dad of a bunch of girls, and as a dad that's also facing a daunting challenge in this culture where we have a tsunami of sexual exploitation and sexualized, hypersexualized imagery and activity in the media around us. So I am definitely with you, those parents who are on this call today, with a deep, deep concern about the effects of sexualized media and pornography on our culture and on our kids. My family experienced also divorce a couple of times before I was even 13 years old, and so like a lot of you, I've also grown through a lot of sort of messiness and experienced some of the pains of some of those kinds of issues in our family, and of course those create new tensions and new issues when it comes to trying to navigate some of the issues like the hypersexualized culture and the culture of porn in which we live in today. So I can also relate to where maybe some of you are as well in that part of your lives. Like many on this call as well, and like many of our children, I was also exposed to pornography at a young age. I stumbled on it as a young preteen, and it was definitely something that made for some unique issues as far as just what I was understanding about sexuality and gender as I was growing up, even growing up in a, albeit dealing with the effects of divorce, overall a pretty healthy home and family environment, good, healthy school environment for the most part. But I was not immune to those same kinds of temptations and issues that I know are hitting our kids nowadays in greater ways than it did even for us when we were younger. In a way, I look back on that and I wish in a way I'd been caught or had the courage to talk to someone about some of the things that I encountered as a young boy because I realize now looking back just how important it is to have a healthy understanding of what's going on in my emerging sense of sexuality and gender issues as I look back as an adult. And so I want to applaud you, first of all, before we go any further in this event today, because you are on this call, you are on this webinar because you care, because you are concerned. The fact that you are here is awesome and commendable. And parents, you play such a critical role in the lives of your kids. Even though you sometimes doubt it, we all do. Even though you may wonder if what you say or do really matters at all in your child's life, I want to assure you today that it absolutely matters. And the fact that you're on this call today is awesome, and I want to commend you for that. take courage and take heart from the fact that you care enough to be with us today asking this question, what can I do if my child has viewed porn? The other thing I want to say, just by way of a quick introduction, and we'll jump into some things real soon here, is that I'm not a licensed counselor, but I do come to you on behalf of Focus on the Family, where we do have a great group of licensed counselors here available, and I'm going to share with you how to contact them in any event that you would like to have contact with one of our counselors. You can call Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 855-771-HELP. The number is there on your screen. You can also find counselor help in your local area by going to our website, focusonthefamily.com/counseling help. One of the things that I want to make sure, too, that you understand about our perspective and my perspective personally is that I myself, as well as the organization that I represent, we really come at these issues from a Christian faith perspective. And so much of what I'll be sharing is applicable no matter what your faith background might be. But some of what I'm going to be sharing is definitely informed by this worldview, and I will trust that will prove helpful to you, whether or not from a faith perspective you and I might not be on the same page about that. But thank you again for joining us, and to start things off, I'd like to start by showing a short little video that explains the challenges that we're facing in this culture and why Focus on the Family has created an alliance with Nanny, who is our host for this webinar. And I think it really conveys quite a bit of what the struggles are for us as parents. So let's watch this video together.
These days, you never know what's going to pop up on the Internet. Get Nanny for your family's complete solution to online protection. Find out more by visiting focusonthefamily.com/netnanny.
So I think you can agree with me that this captures the challenges that we face in our homes. And it goes deeper today than when we were growing up. If you think back to the access that was available to pornography when many of us were kids, it was something that you had to go out of your way to go find. You had to go to maybe a seedy part of town, or you had to dumpster dive, or you had to sneak into somebody's collection if you knew that somebody had some kind of content like that in their homes. Nowadays, we're faced with the daunting task that almost anywhere you look, you're going to see soft porn, or you're going to have very quick, easy access to hardcore pornography. Today, what I want to cover with you are three things. We want to look at the context of this problem, look at the influence and the effects on children of our sex-saturated world, because we need to affirm our concern as parents. We're not always encouraged by this culture to be concerned about this. Sometimes we're looked at as fuddy-duddies, or, sex is only natural, why don't you just, lighten up a bit? But you know what, there is a serious problem here, and we're going to be clear about what that is. We're also going to look at the scope of the problem a little bit, and what are some of the things that we need to consider as we're asking ourselves the question, how do I respond to my child's exposure to pornography? What are some things that we need to consider either before or after that incident occurs, and specifically look at some technology considerations there as well. And then finally, get into some practical help for how to react to the problem, to the issue, when that incident happens. How do I respond as a parent? So those are the three things that we're going to cover in this webinar today. And Benoit, I believe you have a poll question that you wanted to ask of our audience here. So if you can put that poll up.
You know what? We actually did it ahead of time, so it's all right.
Oh, that's right.
Let's just continue, and it'll be fine. Thank you. I'll bring it up later on.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for making sure we're on the same page about that. Well, let's talk now about the context of this problem. And for me, I think these photos here represent our biggest fear. is that everything starts out with our kids. We assume the best of them, and we love to see their innocence, don't we, as parents? And yet, we can't always be with them. We don't always know in what environment they are interacting with other people, with other kids, and having access to things that, particularly through online media, can come so fast and furious with a click or two. We're concerned about their ability, and rightly so, to understand what they have seen, their ability to process what's going on, and their loss of innocence. I don't know about you, but I am happy to have my girls enjoy some of the innocence of childhood. It seems in our culture like we're far too easily losing or taking away the sense of innocence from our children, and they are exposed to so many things that reduce that innocence so quickly, and really can cause a lot of confusion for them at the same time. You know, if you think about it, our world's really eager to exploit our kids. They're eager to push our kids to bear the burdens of being older sooner. And parents, you and I both need to understand that the world around us is eager and ready to fill in the blanks. We have to assume that if we are not talking about whatever the issue is with our children, somebody is answering their questions, whether they're actively doing it or not, and they are filling in the blanks for our kids. Somebody surely will fill in the blanks for our children, and so we need to understand that. We need to embrace our responsibility to do this. So let's talk a little bit about what is the actual influence of our media on the sexuality of our children. And you need to feel affirmed in this question that we're asking today, because that's the reason we're on this webinar. Sexual media is everywhere, and it's selling everything. Here's what some recent research had to share with us about the issue of the effects, particularly on teenagers. Teenagers report that sexual media exerts considerable pressure on them to become sexually active. It is not just about behavior, though, and that's something that we're going to probably say a couple of times on this call. It's not just that there's a cause and effect of what they see and how they behave, but it's because of what they are taking in from media that affects their attitudes and their behaviors. And that's what's driving their actions and their activities and their choices. So this effect is quite real. More teenagers are watching media with sexual content. The more that happens, the more likely they are to be sexually active. That is also a reality as well. And finally, on this slide, greater exposure to sexually oriented media genres is associated with adolescent perceptions that everybody is doing it, when that's not always the case. And that refers not only to their perceptions about sex, but also to their perception about having affairs, fidelity and infidelity, having abortions, divorce. Is that something that even now they're already starting to form their opinions about what is acceptable and what is being done acceptably in the culture, and having children out of wedlock? These are real issues. But again, it's more than just the fact that there's a behavioral connection with all of this. We need to understand that all of these things in our hypersexualized culture are going to the fundamental attitudes and beliefs in our children's hearts. And that is affecting their view that, well, this is how the world, or this is how life must be. So if we want to help guide and shepherd their expectations for their life and their future, we need to make sure that we're dealing with these kinds of issues very clearly. Here are some other points that came out of this research. Participants exposed to highly sexual media became more accepting of casual and stereotypical attitudes about sex and relationship. In other words, it's more than just about behavioral copycat syndrome. That's too simplistic. This is shaping their expectations, their acceptance of these actions, and the cool factor. It's really starting to shape for a lot of these kids, is this natural, and whether or not it is natural, they're thinking because of the exposure of these constant images and actions in the media that exposure is defining for them what is natural. For both male and female, frequent viewing of sexually charged television is associated with more sexual experience and more sexual partners. So we have to help define our child's world, or someone else will do that for us. Let's talk specifically about some of the exposure effects on our very youngest children. First of all, the initial age of porn exposure is going down and down and down in our culture. And why is that? Of course, it's because it's easier to find. It's easier to stumble upon. So many kids are having email accounts now, and nearly half of those kids are reporting in different research and surveys that they are actually getting pornographic emails to those email accounts. As much as the industry tries to tell us, well, we're being really careful about exposing kids to pornographic messages, that's simply not happening. It is happening with any child that has an email account. They're probably getting, even with junk mail filters, probably getting exposed to pornographic images. The impact, of pornography is also relevant to the prevention of child abuse, child sexual abuse and exploitation for a variety of reasons. Violent media is impacting children and youth. Sexual objectification is impacting the mental and physical health of girls all over the place. And as a dad of a bunch of girls, that concerns me greatly. It should concern us about our sons as well, because ultimately when we are starting to objectify people, we are failing to see them with dignity, with humanity, with something, that special spark, what we as Christians would certainly call being made in the image of God, that ought to give us a sense of the value of a person simply because they are a person. You know, with one of my girls once, when they were young and they were in that kind of really super honest phase, we were out and about once and saw a very obese person, and my daughter started laughing at them and very loudly talking about them. And it gave us a great teachable moment to talk about, you know, regardless of the physical appearance of another human being, that is a human being that God has created. That is somebody that is imbued with a special value and dignity. No matter what they look like and no matter what they're doing, we need to see each other in this world as having some special dignity and value. And when we allow porn and the sexual objectification to seep into our culture and into our lives, we're destroying the value of a human life, and we are creating a commodity out of people, which is a very dangerous direction for our culture and for our kids. Sexualized mainstream media contributes to an early onset of sexual behavior, as we were talking about earlier. Newer media appears to have an even greater impact. There's a significant relationship between pornography consumption and the attitudes supporting violence against women. The result of this recent analysis is showing that there's a relationship between significantly stronger relationship between pornography and violent attitudes towards women, particularly with violent pornography. But even with nonviolent pornography, both those types of pornography are showing significant positive associations between those attitudes that support violence against women and those experiences with pornography. Now, we all want our children to see themselves as inherently valuable and special, but when we allow sexual objectification to occur in our minds and our hearts and our actions and our world, it's doing the exact opposite, not just for those people out there in the media that we consume. It's objectifying our children, because ultimately someone else is looking at them as an object just as well. And so that should be of great concern to us. A larger concern is the impact on children who grow, develop, and learn about themselves and their gender and their relationships through the lens of a pornified culture. This is more than just about sex, and sex itself is more than just about biological function or mechanics or something purely physical. You see, the reality is we live in a relational world, and so if we don't understand and teach our children that sexuality is a part of being in a relational world, then we're really hurting their world and their worldview at the same time. This truly matters. This is truly important. This is an important question that I want to ask everybody to think about as they consider what do we do when our children have been exposed to pornography. And this is the question here. What is your ultimate goal for your children's sexuality? Every family has to wrestle with this because our sexuality is a part of who we are. And some of us have grown up with kind of mixed feelings about this. Sometimes we've grown up thinking that sex is dirty. Sometimes we've grown up thinking sex is easy. Sometimes we've grown up thinking sex is for a very specific use and time in our lives. But we have to wrestle with this question because ultimately we need to answer that question for how we will address issues of sexuality, pornography, and all those related matters with our children. Now let me give you an example of kind of how my wife and I look at this. We want to be able to help our daughters to see the connection between sexuality and family, between sexuality and a pure and healthy pleasure that we would say God has given us, God has designed into humanity. And also, there's a connection between sexuality and spirituality. Sexual intercourse, we believe, is best as an act of love shared between a husband and wife. And even for Christians, it's a sacred physical act that symbolizes something very spiritual and very profound in our relationship with God. When we model today, what we model today in our marriages is also likely to reproduce itself in our children's marriages, and this is a huge point. Ultimately, it's not just what's out there that should concern us. It's also about the walls of our home, within the walls of our home as well. Let me restate that in a little bit of a different way. When you think about reacting to pornography with your children, remember that there is an element of this where we're trying to protect our kids from what's outside of us. That may mean putting up walls. It may mean being very vigilant about what we consume in our families. But we cannot ignore the enemy within. And what I mean by that is we need to strengthen the character and integrity of our family from within as well. Because ultimately, no matter how high a wall we build, something will be able to break through that wall, tunnel under that wall, and if we have weak hearts, weak beliefs, weak attitudes about sexuality, we make ourselves and our children vulnerable. So please give serious consideration to that question of the ultimate goal that you have for your children's sexuality. Well, let's get into some specific practical issues. What if my child has viewed pornography? What should I do? How should I react? And the first thing I want to encourage you is to see your role in this is to be a healthy advocate for your child's well-being. It is important and vitally important that we not jump to conclusions. I know of parents who have overreacted in anger, and I know of parents who have perhaps underreacted, hoping and praying that it wasn't that big of a deal, and have regretted it in both cases. We do need to treat it as a serious issue, but we also need to be very, very cautious about how we react. Harsh, impulsive reactions are likely to lead to our child just shutting down. We need to maybe even give ourselves some time to collect our thoughts and emotions if it's something that's really rocked our world as a parent. And I know how that feels. And yes, it is a troubling thing to think, oh my goodness, either they're looking for it or somebody has taken advantage of them. In either case, it is a very emotional issue. So maybe you need to give yourself some time to collect yourself, your thoughts, your emotions. Remember that gentle words are far more effective when dealing with your child on this issue. And might I add, especially for dads, there's something powerfully destructive for us as dads about being a dad that stirs up anger in his children. An angry dad makes angry kids. And so dads, you and I especially, need to really guard our hearts and guard our patience and guard our emotions when this comes to this. An angry dad can't teach, at least not teach the right things, and may even turn your kids towards rebellion. And a final word about the harshness of our reaction, and that is to please be willing to say you're sorry, you messed up, you made a mistake if you do blow up. Don't feel like that's the end of the world. But as I like to say, if you mess up, just fess up. and let your kids know that you're willing to say, I did something wrong. You need to model that for them. I think we all can think of people that we've worked with, maybe a spouse, maybe a parent when we were younger, who it would just drive us nuts if they were just unwilling to say, I goofed up, I messed up, I'm sorry, I did the wrong thing. So we need to model that well for our kids. So don't feel bad if you did blow up, but make that right with your children so that you can start on a good foundation with them in addressing these issues. It is unhealthy to shame them, to overtly shame them on this, because that often leads to more acting out with more pornography. Sometimes it even starts to stir up in your children, well, maybe that's just who I am, and I can't escape this shame and this guilt, and I may as well just give in to it. And that's not what you're looking for there. So please be careful about that as well. You're really going to want to learn how your children were exposed to that pornography, so that's going to be a big part of how you react as well. You need to know some information about that. Did someone introduce pornography to your child? Was it a friend? If it was a friend, well, that's going to maybe dictate the way that you approach their family or that child or your child's relationship with that child. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. If the person who introduced the pornography was older by 3 or 4 years, it may constitute a type of sex abuse, and those incidents need to be reported to local authorities. And again, this becomes critical for you making sure that you are very clear about where they got the exposure to the pornography, why, and if somebody else was involved. As one example among many, many examples, sexting, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is the sharing of nude or very sexually risque photographs, is another issue that's been a hotbed for teenagers, and something that you need to be aware of, because now it gets beyond just your child's interaction with pornography. Now it's getting into their relationships with each other as well, and that's a very alarming issue as well. Let's talk a little bit about technology. It is so critically important for you not to just look at the computer that's on your desk or the laptop. You need to really become familiar with all of the devices that are in your home, because anything that connects to the internet is a potential portal to pornography. It's a harsh reality that access is everywhere. So don't just think about computers and laptops. You need to think about your video game systems. You know, video game systems now, many of them are connected to wireless connections for gameplay, but a lot of them also have apps that are embedded in them now for web access. A lot of our smart TVs coming out now, televisions, as if the stuff that was already coming through the channels wasn't bad enough, now they are building in web access to televisions as well. So, you know, you may be thinking my child's just downstairs watching television, but it may be a gateway, it may be an access point. So you need to be familiar with how your technology works. Of course, we're all familiar with how smartphones, tablets, even iPads and other music players that have Wi-Fi access also can include apps that give them access either to the web or to immediate access to each other. I think many of you may be familiar, for instance, with a tool, an app called Snapchat. And in Snapchat, you can, it's kind of like quick chatting. It's kind of like sharing pictures with your friends on Facebook or Tumblr or something like that. But the difference is it self-destructs the photos within a certain period of time. However, what most kids don't realize is that before that photo self-destructs, whatever device they've sent it to, that person can snap a photo of that photo before it self-destructs. And so one of the rules you need to help your kids understand is nothing they do online and digitally is ever private. It can all become public to everyone by anyone. And so they need to understand that. So learn those devices. Book readers is another one that are common book readers that are available for the Kindle, and some of those as well also can become access points. So learn those devices, learn their settings, use those parental controls, change passwords on a regular basis if you need to, and make sure that you're also familiar with the apps that your kids are downloading onto their devices. Even if your kids don't have many or even any of these devices, here's the other reality. Their friends do. Maybe friends at school, it may be friends in the neighborhood, and maybe friends in church. And even worse, there are people who are predators who have these tools, who would love to take advantage of our kids. So we really need to do a good job of owning and knowing those devices. Let me give you a quick example from some research done by Verizon a couple of years ago. And they were looking at the ages of when kids were getting cell phones. And this is pretty remarkable. 42%, and this was just 2 years ago, 42% were 7 to 12 years old. That nearly doubles when you add 13 to 15-year-olds who have phones. Now, I'm not saying don't use technology. You know, some families may want to or need to make those hard choices, ask those hard questions about what technology will we use. And I completely understand and respect that. But technology ultimately is just a tool. And tools need to be handled properly. We need to understand their uses, their best and intended uses, and we need to understand their dangers of misuse. And so, again, I just want to stress you've got to be familiar with all of the devices in your home because those create some access points. Now let's talk a little bit about some specific questions to ask your child and some other principles about how to talk with them further. One of the critical questions you're going to want to ask is, was this your first time seeing this pornography, whatever that was? The reason why this is so important, first of all, one incident doesn't necessarily mean automatic addiction. And I think sometimes we as parents are fearful of that, and so we jump to that conclusion. And we need to make sure that we don't overburden our child with that kind of expectation. But let me be clear about this. Frequency of exposure absolutely matters. And a child does become increasingly desensitized over time. When desensitization is occurring, a child is typically going to begin to seek a greater frequency of exposure to pornography and probably harder and more severe types of pornography. And that can lead, that overstimulation over time can also lead to addiction. So the exposure is important, and you need to understand that to understand the context then of what you're dealing with. Just what exactly did you see? And again, I want to stress on this point to be gentle, to be patient, to wait it out, to demonstrate to your child that you are a safe place for them to go to. Now, they are already going to be embarrassed. Many times they'll be embarrassed. They'll be feeling guilty. They'll probably be feeling confused. So please be gentle and patient with them as you're working through these questions. But this helps you understand the context then of what they saw and why they saw, because you need to understand what is it that you're dealing with. It may have been a brief glimpse of something that they clicked on an email. As I said earlier, 47% of school-aged children are receiving porn spam on a daily basis. Was it violent? Was it heterosexual? Was it homosexual? Was it limited to body parts? Or did it include specific acts? You need to know what exactly they were viewing so that you can better handle this next question, and that is, what questions do you have? Son, daughter, what questions do you have? And show a willingness to answer them or research for them, because frankly, some of this is going to come from simple sexual curiosity that a lot of kids that we've all grown up with and experienced. And again, if you don't overreact and you give them an opportunity in a safe way for them to ask questions either about what they saw or what they were searching for perhaps when they encountered that, it gives you an opportunity to become their expert. It gives you the opportunity to position yourself as the source that they need to go to for help, for questions and answers. Who or what may have influenced you? Again, this is important for context because you need to understand what else you were up against. Was this a friend? Was it something they did on their own? Was it something that somebody, perhaps in more of a predatory situation, may have influenced them to do? Those are all important and critical aspects of this situation that you're going to want to understand. Do you understand why this matters and why I'm taking this seriously? That's a great question to ask your children as you were talking through all of these things, because ultimately what you want to communicate to them is that it's not just about this one incident. It's not just about this one choice or this one activity. This is about your future and your health. And you want to position yourself as a parent to say, I care about your health, and I love you. And you know what? There are going to be many in this world who will pretend to care about you and to love you. But you need to understand that there will be no one who does that more than me in this life. This is about positioning yourself to be their best advocate, to empower them as they're growing older, to be confident in who they are and what they're doing. And another important question to ask, has anything in our home encouraged this? And this one you may have to buckle up a little bit for a hard answer to this question. It's a tough question, but it's a necessary question, because sometimes we assume that our home is a safe place, but we don't always appreciate either the things that we've allowed to come into our home that may be influencing our children, or maybe even the attitudes and activities that we have as parents that we assume our kids don't see it, our kids don't hear it, our kids aren't affected by it. But Mom, Dad, we need to own up to the fact that what we are surrounding them by our choices, by our behavior, by our attitudes, is absolutely impacting our children. I'd like to share with you just a brief little story, too, that I heard a long time ago about a woman named Corrie ten Boom. Now, Corrie ten Boom was a survivor of World War II. Her family were Christians that had protected some Jews during the Holocaust. And when she told the story about when she was a little girl and she was asking her dad about sex, and she was wanting to understand where the context of sex had come up in a poem that she'd read at school, and her mom had just been too embarrassed to talk to her about it. And she says this. She says, he turned to look at me, as he always did when answering a question, but to my surprise, he said nothing. And at last on this train, he stood up and lifted a suitcase from the rack over our heads and set it on the floor. He said, will you carry it off the train, Corrie? And she tried to pick it up, and she said, it's too heavy. And he said, yes. It would be a pretty poor father who would ask his little girl to carry such a load. And it's the same way, Corrie, with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you're older and stronger, you can bear it, but from now on, you must trust me to carry it for you. And I share that with you because I think there are times when, depending on age appropriateness, we're going to need to help our children to learn to trust us to sort of carry those heavy suitcases for us. One mom I know shared this story, and she said, you know, we call it a suitcase thing now, so that when our children ask us a question that they're really not quite ready emotionally to handle, I'll say to them, you know, honey, that's a suitcase thing, and we'll open that up when you're a bit older. And she said, you know, that often seems to satisfy our child. So keep something like that in mind as well as you're working through these different issues and questions. Let's talk a little bit about this constant dialogue with them more now. And remember that this is about dialogue. It's never going to be about 100% prevention of a pornographic incident in the home. This is more about safety and health than about punishment. That's a great message to give your kids. Because what you don't want to tell them is, sex is so dirty, you need to save it for the one you love. Or you need to save it for marriage. That's such a mixed message for our kids. We do want them to understand the power and the beauty of our sexuality, but within a safe and good context. Let them know that our goal is for them to have a safe environment, including answering their questions and satisfying their curiosities. Think in terms of making them equipped, ready, and knowledgeable in the best ways for the best reasons. Think of it like driving a car or using a gun or some heavy equipment. You need to be trained. You need to make sure that you understand what is at stake when you're doing those things. And it's the same thing with our sexuality. You know, one thing that might be really helpful with them is to bring up a toy, a device, a favorite of theirs, clothing, jewelry, something meaningful to the child, and talk about what they would feel like if you didn't use that well, if you misused it, if you didn't use it in a proper way, and how would they feel about that prized possession. And then you can create an analogy for them that says that's what our bodies and our sexuality are like. They are so good and they are so special, but we want to protect them and use them in healthy ways. We don't want to shame them. We don't want to fight fire with fire. We want to make sure that we are expressing to them the beauty and power of a healthy sexuality. Also, one thing that can be really helpful, if you're familiar with the story of Joseph in the Bible, where he's gone through so many difficult things in life, and yet he winds up saving the country of Egypt and his father's family because of the ways he winds up being a wise leader in the land of Egypt, which is not even his own land. And at the end, his brothers, who are apologizing to him for all of the misuse and fearful for their own lives, he says, you know what? What others meant for evil, what you meant for evil, God intended and used for good. And this is a great message for our kids to hear from us, is that, you know what, this is not a good situation that's happened. This exposure to this pornography is not a good thing, but I'm grateful that it's given us an opportunity to connect, for me
Leon,
to help you with these issues. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know we're running out of time, and you still have so much to share. If you can just talk a little faster, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I was just seeing that on the clock as well, so we will fly through these next, some of these next slides. When you think about preventing future occurrences, there's really 4 steps that can be very helpful in how you react to this. First of all is to understand that there are triggers that affect our behaviors in our homes. And so you need to understand that while you can't guarantee that your child will never be exposed, you can look at what are the things that might trigger that exposure and start controlling those trigger points and being sensitive to those things. One of the things that you can do is limit time. Move the computer perhaps into a more public area of the house, those kinds of things. But beyond behavioral issues, let's look at cognitive as well. You want to be sure that you're helping your child understand a healthy view of sexuality, and we've talked about this already on the call here. Emotive modification, this is helping your child to deal with the emotional attachment that comes with sexual intimacy. And if you have questions about that, I would like to recommend a book called Hooked, New Science on How Casual Sex is Affecting Our Children by Joe McElhaney and Frida Bush. It's an excellent book that really helps us as parents understand and relate to our kids the spiritual and emotional connection in relationships sexually. And finally, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, make sure that you're really taking time to teach your child about the spiritual connection with sex and relationship, because that's also so very important. And let me just end with this real quick. More is caught than taught by parents. You need to guard your homes, your hearts, your minds. How many times do we as parents come down hard on our kids when we are guilty of the very same thing? So mom, dad, we need to guard the sexual purity of our hearts. We need to guard our homes and our choices as well. Please be encouraged. You are still the #1 influencer in your child's life. And that shows up in research over and over again, even in research in places like MTV, which had to acknowledge, you know what, as much as we try to be an influence on kids, parents are the #1 influence in kids' lives. Know your kids and what they're engaging with, and set boundaries. Monitor the use of social media. Contracts, which we'll talk about in just a second, are a great way to do that. Contracts and pledges, where your family says, these are the things we'll hold each other accountable to. Software for your computer can be very effective, although so many parents wait until an incident to install safety tools like this. That's okay. It's never too late to do that. And by the way, if you're a parent that's responding to an incident and now you're thinking of putting some guards and some filters on your devices, don't be ashamed of that, and encourage your friends to do it before it happens to them, because it so often will happen. And also, as we were talking about earlier, know your devices. You can contact your mobile providers for parental control options. And there's also a lot of online helps too. You can look on forums. YouTube videos will show you how to do parental settings on different devices. Do a little bit of homework and that'll come back to help you in so many big ways. Finally, we just want to say, for all the attendees on this call, you will receive from Focus on the Family a free copy of our Internet Safety Contract via email, and the good folks at NetNanny are also providing a promo code, No Porn, for 20% off for NetNanny Social, for NetNanny Win, and a couple of other great tools that they have. And just want to end before we go to our question and answer with a reminder that if you are looking for help, and perhaps some of the questions you might have today are really big, deep questions, please feel free to call us at Focus on the Family at 855-771-HELP, and we would be happy to help you through that phone call.
Super, Leon. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I had to rush you a little bit at the end because we have hundreds of questions that we have been distilling behind the scenes to see if we can have some of them addressed by you, because it's always best to be able to have a specialist be able to address it on the webinar. So at least for the next 10 minutes, if you're game, Leon, let's see if we can aggregate some of these questions and make them not so much individual by individual, but the themes that have come together. One of the consistent themes that have come to the forefront, if you wouldn't mind addressing it, is at what age do you address this topic of pornography, and in order to prevent it, what's the right age? What's the appropriate age? How would you answer that?
Well, I think it's never too early to start helping our kids understand that gender and sexuality are a part of who we are and are important. It's really important that we don't, wait until they're 16 or 18 and assume that they've not been exposed to anything, and that they, they're now ready for this kind of information. It can start, part of it is you need to look at the maturity of your child. You need to go a little bit by the cues that you're getting as far as their curiosity and what are the questions that they're asking. And meet the question at the level of the question when they're younger. One of the jokes I remember from when I was a young adult was a little boy that went to his mom and said, "Mommy, where do I come from?" And she had tried to be prepared for that question. She started giving him all of the answers about sex and reproduction and everything, and he said, "Well, that's interesting, I guess, but I was just wondering because my friend Billy said he was from Cleveland." And so, it's important for us as parents to not overburden them at a young age with too much information. But there are some great resources on Focus on the Family, and I know in other places, that help you answer the question of how to address it at different ages. But I think it's important for us to start realizing that even as we talk about slight differences between boys and girls, that we're talking about the beauty of marriage, or we're talking about the beauty about differences between male and female. Even as a young child, we're starting to teach them about sexuality even before we're starting to talk about parts or activities or the mechanics of that. We want to make sure that we're leading with an emphasis on healthy understanding of our sexuality. So,
thank you. I'm going to speak a little louder as well. Another sort of theme that's come up, Leon, is at what point is it necessary, or when do we know that it's time for professional counseling? How do we know that it's time to get some external help? How would you answer that for children who've already viewed and parents are all worried to death?
That's a really good question. Well, first of all, I would say you don't want to overreact to maybe just a single incident. I think, like we were saying earlier, sometimes we think that a first exposure automatically means massive addiction problems, and now we've got, years of counseling ahead of us as a family, or our child has years of counseling ahead of them. And so we want to be careful not to overreact. At the same time, what I think we need to be very aware of is watch how our children respond to our guidance. Watch how they respond to the information that we're giving them. If we see if we see confusion, if we see them being withdrawn, if we see them being maybe acting out in rebellion to the standards that we're trying to pass on to them, it might be time to consider looking for some counseling. Another thing that obviously complicate this is if there are other people that have been a part of this, whether it's a relative, a friend, someone in the home. Those really all of a sudden crank up the level of importance here, and that's when you don't want to try to do this alone, and you need to seek good counseling, good help. So I would say, take your cues from some of those kinds of things as far as trying to decide if some counseling is going to be needed. If abuse has been a part of this at all, absolutely you're going to want to have some good counsel involved, because now you're talking way more than just something that's been observed by your child. Now you're talking about an experience that's imprinting on their heart, on their mind, on their soul, that is going to potentially cause great problems for them, not just immediately but down the road. So that would be another case where I think you definitely would want to get some counseling involved.
Thank you. Thank you on that response. With a limited amount of time, I'm going to weave two strong themes that have come in, and they're sort of related because it talks it from a perspective of a parent. How can I, as a parent, gain trust again, or feel that I can trust my child when my child has consistently viewed porn, and I want to feel like I can trust them? This is a question that continues to sort of come up from the audience that has been listening, and I'm going to mingle one more into that. And then at the same time, how do you at the same time also balance the freedom and the ability for our kids to make their own choices, so that our clamping down does not suffocate them from being able to make their own decisions?
Well, those are fantastic questions, and we as parents, we want to think that we can control and guide our kids to keep from making the mistakes we've made, or to keep from hurting themselves. That's a very natural feeling as a parent. But the reality is that you're talking about an independent human being who has to live with the consequences of the choices that they make as well. And that is a hard thing to do, particularly when our children are younger. When they are older, that it's a little bit easier to do, but as I'm finding out even with my 16-year-old and teaching her how to drive, it is still not always easy to let go of the wheel. But speaking of driving, I think that can help us in kind of approaching this is think of like a driver's license. When our kids are learning how to drive, do we want to trust them? We want to trust them. Do we trust them immediately? Absolutely not, because we have to see that they are demonstrating an ability to take information and apply it consistently. There's the old adage of trust but verify. And you know what? We need to tell our kids when we're telling them you're going to have to earn my trust back, that verification of your activities is going to have to be a part of that. It's not because I don't love you. It's actually because I do love you that I'm going to take this trust but verify approach. And so just be aware of that. There are some great resources out there like Game Plan or Tribe that also talk about just how to develop a way of communicating with your child and building up that trust. But be clear about what your expectations are, and then be clear with them about how you're going to verify how they are responding to those expectations in dealing with the consequences that you've laid out. It is a process, though. It's not going to happen overnight. So give yourself the permission and the freedom to deal with that. And then finally, just for those older children, remember that that's going to be a constant battle as they become more and more independent, is to give them that room, but then give them freedom to fail, and make sure that they know that you unconditionally love them no matter what they do.
Thank you. I was busily typing in on the other side for some of these questions. Thank you, Leon. I have to bring up one topic, please, before we close.
Sure.
We had a very quick poll done before the webinar started, just so we could see what percentage of you already had your internet devices, let's call them internet devices, already filtered and protected from porn. And we were happy to see the majority of you, but 17% had not got that. And we are still receiving questions coming online as to how to protect, can we protect and help with smartphones or iPhones, or to manage and watch what people are doing on Facebook or Pinterest or whatever. The whole purpose of Content Watch and Net Nanny came about because of a very successful businessman who wanted his life to help other people, and so we have created products. And so before we hang up, I must share this, that there are 17% of you who do not have anything to stop or prevent porn and such entering your homes. Please use that promotion code NOPORN and go to Net Nanny and get yourself a 20% break. But please go and protect your smartphones, all of them, your tablets, your Windows or Macintosh computers. We have products that cover all of the normal hardware that's out there. And with that said, we have run out of time, and I have to thank Leon for a fabulous presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all of you, and to even those who registered and who couldn't make it. You will get an email, and you will see again at your own time the ability to review this. At the last half of the webinar, as you can see on the screen, resources and references are available. We hope you will be better off for having attended this. I certainly will be. And we appreciate Leon for making his time, busy time, available. Leon, do you have any parting words for the audience?
Just again, I want to encourage everyone for being a part of this. Thank you for being a part of this with us, and just be encouraged that you do matter, you do have a great amount of influence, and be committed to the loving and caring administration of your child's health and well-being, and that attitude and that approach and being willing to take advantage of teachable moments will take you very, very far in dealing with this very difficult topic. And our prayers are with each one of you who have gone through this and the pain of this, that you will be wise and loving and gracious and helpful to your children on their journey.
Super, super, super. For everybody else who's been on here, thank you so much. We're now formally ending the webinar. Leon, thank you very much. And for the rest of our friends, look out for the next webinar. We hope you will join us as more great topics are addressed as we, family and parents, try to make our homes that much safer. Again, thank you for attending.